My name is Malene Reeves, though most people just call me Maddie. For as long as I can remember, I was the quiet one in my family, the daughter who stayed behind when everyone else chased their own lives. I became the caretaker, the anchor, the one who remained at Reeves' house to tend to my father as his health slowly declined. Some might have called it a burden, but to me it was devotion. That estate with its ivy-covered walls and white rose bushes wasn't just a house. It was our history, our blood carved into brick and stone. My father, James Reeves, had built it not just as shelter, but as a legacy. And I carried that legacy like it was stitched into my skin. The roses bloomed each spring in shades of white, so pure they almost glowed at dusk. My father planted them himself the year I got engaged, saying they'd be perfect for wedding photos. The irony, of course, was that the roses outlasted the marriage. My ex-husband Holden walked out on me not long after the vows, choosing his secretary Tricia over the woman he once swore to love. It was humiliating, shattering, but even in heartbreak, I had Reeves' house and I had my father. Until he passed and the ground beneath me shifted in ways I hadn't prepared for. 2 weeks after his funeral, I was in the garden pruning those same roses when I heard the sharp, deliberate crunch of heels on gravel. I didn't even have to look up to know who it was. Tricia. The secretary who had become my replacement, now wearing a diamond band Holden once promised me meant forever. She walked toward me with a smirk painted across her face, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Still playing in the dirt, Maddie," she said. I clipped a thorny branch, careful not to crush the petals, and waited. I knew she hadn't come for small talk. "You know why I'm here," she continued, stepping closer until her shadow cut across my roses. "The reading of the will is tomorrow. Holden and I thought it best to settle things civilly." I wiped my hands on my apron and finally met her gaze. "There's nothing to settle. This is my father's home," was she corrected, lips curling in triumph. "And since Holden was like a son to James for 15 years, we believe we're entitled to our fair share." Her words sliced deeper than she knew. My grip tightened on the shears as the rage simmered. "The same Holden who cheated on me with you?" I asked, my voice low but steady. She shrugged as though infidelity were a trivial thing. "Ancient history. Your father forgave him. They still played golf every Sunday." "My father wouldn't leave him anything," I said firmly. "He wasn't stupid." For the briefest moment, her smile faltered. But then she tossed her hair, masking it with arrogance. "We'll see about that," she said, turning toward her car. "You might want to start packing. We'll need at least a month to renovate once we move in." Her words clung to me like smoke even after her car disappeared down the driveway. I looked down at the crushed petals in my hands, white roses once symbols of new beginnings, now streaked red from my cut. My father always said the garden spoke if you knew how to listen. That day, it spoke of war. As I bent to gather the fallen petals, something caught my eye, an envelope half buried beneath the rosebush, its corner damp with dew. My heart stuttered when I saw the handwriting. It was my father's. To Maddie, it read in the deliberate, confident script I had known all my life. I brushed away the dirt with trembling fingers. It felt heavier than paper. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called the one person I trusted, Danielle Cooper, my best friend and attorney. "Tricia just paid me a visit," I said when she answered. "She's worse than we thought. Can you come over?" "I'll be there in 20, she replied, "and I'm bringing wine." When she arrived, briefcase in one hand and a bottle of Pinot Noir in the other, I was still holding the envelope. "You haven't opened it yet?" she asked, eyeing it as we sat in my father's study. "I wanted to wait for you." With her nod, I broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter and a small brass key. My father's voice filled my mind as I read, "Dear Maddie, if you're reading this, someone has already made a move on the estate. Knowing human nature, I'm guessing it's Tricia. She always reminded me of a shark, all teeth, no soul." The key enclosed opens the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, you'll find everything you need to protect what's yours. Remember what I taught you about chess? Sometimes you sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen. Love always, Dad. My eyes blurred with tears as Danielle unlocked the desk drawer. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a USB drive. She handed them to me with a grave expression. "There's more," she said softly. "3 days before he died, your dad added a modification to his will. A clause that changes everything." I wiped my cheeks, staring at her. What kind of claws? Her lips curved into the faintest smile. The kind that sets a trap. Danielle spread the contents of the envelope across the desk, and what I saw made my breath catch. Surveillance photos, bank statements, printed emails, all of it meticulously gathered and organized. One of the photos showed Trisha in a dimly lit parking lot handing something to a man in a suit. My father hadn't just hoped for the best, he had prepared for the worst. He came to me 6 months ago, Danielle said quietly, sipping her wine, right after his diagnosis. He told me he knew how this would play out. He wanted to be ready. I stared at the evidence, torn between grief and awe. My father had spent his final months crafting a safety net, not just for his estate but for me. He hadn't said a word, not even when he grew weaker in those last days. Instead, he had trusted me to find this when the time was right. That night, I sat alone in his study long after Danielle left. The letter rested in my lap, my father's voice still echoing in my head. A storm was coming, but instead of fear, I felt something else stirring inside me, resolve. At 9 o'clock, a knock sounded at the door. I opened it to find my brother Aaron. He looked nothing like the polished man I'd seen at the funeral. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken. In his hands was a worn leather portfolio he clutched like a lifeline. "You look terrible," I said. "Playing double agent isn't as glamorous as the movies make it out to be," he muttered with a weak smile. "Can I come in?" In the study, his gaze fell on the evidence spread across the desk. He sighed heavily before sitting across from me. "I see you found Dad's insurance policy. Why didn't you tell me what you were doing?" My voice cracked sharper than I meant, but the wound of his past betrayal still throbbed. During my divorce, he had sided with Holden, pretending neutrality while silently excusing their betrayal. That memory had carved a scar I hadn't forgiven. Aaron rubbed his temples. "Because I had to make things right." His voice was quieter now, edged with shame. "After what I did during your divorce, ignoring how they humiliated you, I was wrong, Maddie. I knew it. So when Trisha approached me, I saw my chance." He opened his portfolio and slid out a check. $500,000. That's what she offered me to testify that Dad wasn't of sound mind when he amended the will. I looked up sharply. "But you didn't take it." "No," he said. His voice cracked. "I took it straight to Dad, told him everything. You should have seen his face. Not angry, just disappointed. That hurt worse than if he'd yelled." My throat tightened as he continued. "That's when he brought me in, asked me to help him gather evidence. I recorded everything, meetings, threats, even Trisha's voice." He pulled out a phone and pressed play. Trisha's voice filled the room. "Once the old man kicks it, we'll contest the will. Aaron, you'll testify about his mental state, and Holden's history with him will seal it. Maddie won't know what hit her." My hands curled into fist nails, biting into my palms. Aaron fast-forwarded. Holden's voice came next, cold and smug. "We'll sell the house, liquidate everything. Maddie can go back to her little gardening business. She never deserved any of it anyway." "Turn it off," I whispered. He did. But then he reached back into the portfolio and drew out another document. "This is why I came tonight. It wasn't just greed. Trisha wanted revenge. For what happened when you caught them together for the alimony she thinks embarrassed Holden." I swallowed hard, the memory striking like a blade. Walking into my bedroom, finding them tangled in betrayal, her triumphant smile as my world shattered. Aaron's voice pulled me back. "She started embezzling from Dad's company 6 months before his diagnosis. That's when he realized what she was capable of. That's when he started planning this trap." I sank into the chair, stunned by the scale of it all. My father hadn't just left me an estate. He had orchestrated a checkmate from beyond the grave. "Sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom," Aaron said. "Sometimes it comes in a letter, a drawer, and a father's unwavering faith in his daughter." I looked down at the photos, the recordings, the documents. Tomorrow, at the reading of the will, Trisha and Holden would walk into what they thought was their victory, but they had no idea of the storm waiting to break. The morning of the will reading, Reeves' house felt like a stage awaiting its play. The air itself seemed taut, heavy with anticipation. I dressed deliberately in a simple black dress and my mother's pearls. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I wanted to see not the abandoned wife or the grieving daughter, but the woman my father believed could carry his legacy. The law office smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish. Holden was already there when I arrived, his hand wrapped around Trisha's like a brand. She wore red, a shade too loud for mourning, too smug for humility. She smiled at me, lips painted like blood, and leaned into him as though she'd already won. "Morning, Maddie," she purred. "I do hope you brought an open mind. This is going to be illuminating." I sat opposite them, my lawyer Danielle at my side. Aaron slipped in quietly, avoiding their eyes. But when he sat behind me, I felt a small unspoken shield at my back. The executor cleared his throat and began. The will was long filled with the formal cadence of legalese. But I barely heard the first part: small bequest to charities, mementos left to distant cousins. I waited for the moment I knew would come. To my daughter Malene Reeves, I leave Reeves House and the estate in its entirety, including all associated assets. Trisha's smile froze, Holden's jaw clenched, but the executor wasn't finished. There is, however, an addendum dated 3 days before Mr. Reeves's passing. This addendum states that any contestation of the will by outside parties will trigger the release of supplementary documents to the probate court. Danielle slid a folder across the table before the executor could even reach for it. "Those documents," she said, her voice sharp with precision. Trisha snatched it open, scanning the pages. Her face drained of color as she realized what she was holding. Her own emails, financial statements showing money funneled into personal accounts, audio recordings of her plotting. "You set me up," she hissed, her eyes locking on mine. I tilted my head, my voice calm. "No. You set yourself up. My father just made sure I'd have the truth." Holden leaned over the papers, his face paling as he recognized his own words recorded and transcribed. His attempt at a smirk faltered. "This is inadmissible, circumstantial." Danielle didn't flinch. "The bank statements are not circumstantial. The embezzlement is documented. And the recordings, while perhaps dramatic, are damning when paired with your signatures." The executor cleared his throat again, visibly uncomfortable. "Should this proceed to court, these materials will be examined as evidence. Given their nature, it is highly unlikely any contestation would succeed. In fact, criminal charges could follow." Silence pressed down on the room like a stone. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Trisha slammed the folder shut. "This isn't over," she spat. But I saw the fear in her eyes. The bravado was cracked, the edges fraying. Holden's hand slipped from hers, and for the first time, he looked at me not with arrogance, but with something closer to shame, or maybe resentment, that his scheme had unraveled. When the meeting adjourned, I stood slowly smoothing the hem of my dress. My knees trembled, but I didn't let it show. My father's words whispered through me, "Sometimes you sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen." Outside, the autumn air was sharp, carrying the scent of burning leaves. Aaron walked beside me, silent at first. Then he said he would have been proud of you. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. This wasn't just about protecting the estate, it was about protecting his memory. Danielle joined us, her heels clicking on the pavement. "It's not over," she cautioned. "People like Trisha don't just disappear quietly, but you have the upper hand now." I looked back at the law office, its windows reflecting the gray sky. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of control. The battle wasn't finished, but the first strike had landed, and it was mine. That night, I walked through the rose garden alone. The petals glowed pale in the moonlight, the thorns gleaming like tiny blades. I knelt to touch one bloom, whispering to my father as if he could hear me. "I won't let them take this from us." The garden was silent, but in that stillness, I felt his presence steady and unyielding. The war had only begun, but I was no longer afraid of the fight. Days turned into weeks, and though the will had been read and the trap sprung, Trisha did not vanish from my life. Like a shadow, she lingered at the edges, circling, looking for weakness. I saw her once in town, standing outside the florist with her phone pressed to her ear, eyes narrowing when she spotted me. She didn't wave, she didn't speak. She just stared like a predator marking its prey. But the real storm arrived one cold November morning when a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door serving papers. Trisha was contesting the will after all. Her claim that my father had been manipulated, coerced by me and Aaron in his final days. Reading the words made my hands shake with rage. It wasn't enough that she had tried to take everything from me while he was alive now. She meant to tarnish his memory, to paint him as weak, confused, a pawn. Danielle came over that evening, her briefcase full of countermeasures. She paced the study while I sat in my father's old chair, the envelope he had left me resting on the desk. "It's desperation," she said. "She knows she can't win, but she thinks dragging you through court will bleed you dry." Aaron sat in the corner, silent, guilt still a weight in his posture. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "We'll fight her. We have the recordings, the statements. We can show she was the manipulator, not Dad." I looked at both of them, then at the portrait of my father above the fireplace. His eyes seemed to watch us, steady and unwavering. "We'll fight," I said. "But not just to win. We'll fight to end this for good." The trial began in January. The courthouse was a cold, echoing place, its marble floors amplifying every step like a drumbeat of judgment. Trisha arrived each day in sleek suits, her hair pulled back, her expression calculated innocence. Holden hovered at her side, though I noticed the cracks, the way he avoided her gaze when she snapped the weariness in his shoulders. They were a team built on sand, and I could almost see the tide coming for them. The prosecution was brutal. They painted me as a bitter daughter clinging to an inheritance I didn't deserve. They whispered about my failed marriage, my solitude, even my gardening, as though pruning roses were a crime. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words echoing, chipping away at my confidence. But every morning I put on my pearls and walked back into that courtroom, reminding myself I wasn't just fighting for me. I was fighting for my father's truth. Then came the moment Danielle had orchestrated like a maestro. She called Aaron to the stand. My stomach twisted as he raised his hand, swearing to tell the truth. For years I had doubted him, resented him, even hated him. But now, watching him steady himself before the court, I saw not the brother who had abandoned me, but the man trying to atone. He told the story plainly: the offer of money, the betrayal he almost committed, and the decision to confess to our father. He handed over the recordings, his voice steady, even as Trisha's played through the speakers for the jury. "Once the old man kicks it, we'll contest the will. Aaron, you'll testify about his mental state." Her voice dripped with venom, echoing through the chamber. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Even the judge's face tightened. Trisha tried to recover, tried to paint it as a joke, a misunderstanding. But the evidence piled higher: the bank statements, the forged signatures, the embezzlement trails. Piece by piece, her mask crumbled. The day the verdict came, snow was falling outside, soft and relentless. The judge's words were measured, but their weight was devastating for her. The contestation was denied, the estate confirmed as mine, and the evidence against her referred for criminal investigation. Trisha's face went pale, her composure slipping at last. Holden sat beside her, but this time he didn't reach for her hand. I sat in silence, the words sinking into me like warm light through ice. I had won. Not just the estate, not just the battle, but the right to remember my father as he was strong, clear, and cunning to the very end. That night I walked again through the rose garden. The snow clung to the branches, white on white thorns, glistening like jewels. I touched one bloom and whispered, "We did it, Dad." The garden didn't answer, but I felt the quiet triumph in the stillness and the strength it had taken to reach this moment. Yet even then, a part of me wondered, was this truly the end, or just the close of one chapter? The weeks after the verdict were a blur of relief and exhaustion. For the first time in years, Reeves' house was quiet, not with grief, not with tension, but with peace. The court battle had drained me body and soul, but it had also cleansed something deeper. I could walk through the halls without feeling hunted. I could stand in my father's study and hear his voice, not in whispers of fear, but in echoes of pride. Trisha's downfall came swiftly. The investigation into her embezzlement widened, pulling Holden down with her. Their faces appeared in newspapers and online articles, no longer painted as ambitious or powerful, but disgraced. She was indicted on fraud and conspiracy charges. Holden, ever the coward, cut a deal and turned on her to save himself. I saw their mugshots once printed in the local paper, and instead of satisfaction, I felt only emptiness. They had already taken enough from me. I refused to let their ruin take more. Aaron tried to make amends in the aftermath. He came to Reeves' house one evening with trembling hands and eyes rimmed red. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." I studied him for a long moment before answering. "You already started, Aaron. You stood beside me when it mattered most. That's what Dad would have wanted." We sat together in silence after that, sipping tea in the study as the fire crackled. It wasn't reconciliation, not fully, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, I realized, were rare gifts. Life did not return to what it had been before. It never could. But in the stillness of winter, I found small rituals that stitched me back together. Morning walks in the rose garden, pruning the branches with careful hands. Long hours in the library, reading through my father's old journals, his words guiding me like stars. Letters from women in town, widows, daughters, wives, who thanked me for standing up in court, for proving that inheritance wasn't just about money, but about dignity. One afternoon in spring, as the roses began to bloom again, I opened the last drawer of my father's desk and found another letter tucked beneath a stack of yellowed receipts. It was shorter than the first, written in his steady hand. Maddie, if you're reading this, you've already fought the hardest battles. Remember, our family's strength was never the house, never the land, but the courage to defend it. Don't let bitterness be your legacy. Let love be. Always, Dad. I pressed the paper to my chest, tears falling freely. For the first time since the nightmare began, I allowed myself to feel not just grief, but hope. From then on, I stopped thinking of Reeves' house as a fortress. It became a sanctuary not just for me, but for others. I opened its doors for community gatherings, for charities my father once admired, for children who had nowhere else to go. The halls filled with laughter again, the kind I thought I'd never hear within these walls. And sometimes when I walked through the garden at dusk, I swore I felt him beside me. Not a ghost, but a presence steady, proud, reminding me that betrayal does not define us, but how we rise from it does. So if you're listening to my story now, let this be the truth you take with you. People will try to strip you of what's yours. They will lie, betray, and claw at your soul. But your worth is not in what they take, it's in what you choose to protect and the love you refuse to surrender. If my story touched you, I ask you to like this video, share it with someone who needs courage, subscribe for more stories of resilience, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Because sometimes sharing our scars is how we remind each other that healing is possible.